I wanted to talk today about Saint Charbel and point out a couple of things that most people don't know about that I found inspiring, at least to me, and I think you will too. Because in our life we experience sometimes tragedies or difficulties, and it is in those that we discover God. Also, God sends signs to us now and then. And if we close our eyes and our hearts, we miss what the Lord is pointing out to us. Saint Charbel was born to Antoun Makhlouf and Brigitte Chidia. He was one of 5 children. He had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, but he was the youngest of them. They lived very poorly, but when he was just 3 years old, a great tragedy hit the family. His father was conscripted by the Turkish army for service, and he was so exhausted. On the way back, he caught a fever and he died on the way and was buried distant from their town of Kafra. And so they didn't even have a chance to bury him themselves. But you can imagine the sorrow and the children at such a young age, especially Saint Charbel at the age of 3, waiting for his father to come home, and he would never come home, and his mother trying to explain to him he's now with Jesus. It was a very difficult time, and you can imagine the effect that it had on him from that age and as he was growing up. But the Lord works in mysterious ways, and He uses the hardships and the tragedies of life to bring good out of it. Good can come out of something when our hearts are open and we turn to God. Sometimes when bad things happen, people get mad at God and say, "Where are you?" But then sometimes they say, "Where is God in this?" And they go on a search. And this is what we have to do. Thanks be to God, his mother was very devoted and was well known in the town that she used to fast a lot and pray a lot. And so she raised them very strong in the faith. But she also worked very hard on the farm and also took up silk weaving. And this is how she supported the family. But she also remarried a deacon of the church. And later on he became a priest. And so Saint Charbel and her children were raised in this atmosphere of holiness around church and the priest. So this is how Saint Charbel grew up. And then as he got older, he didn't enter the monastery till he was 23. But before that, as he was getting older, his uncles, his mother's brothers, 2 of them were consecrated hermits. A lot of people don't know that. But he used to go and visit them. They were not far from Kafra. And when he would go, he would learn from them how they lived and the monastic way of life. Sometimes they would go to do ministry in a nearby town, Kfar Zghaib. And so they would take him because he would stay with them for a little bit. He would minister to the people. But in that town was a church in ruins. There's no roof, but it's all stone. And people in those days, and I think still till now, they would go to these ruins and they would light candles and they would pray. They would bring icons. and he would go there and pray with them. This church was dedicated to a certain saint, and you will never guess that saint's name. His name was Charbel. This was Charbel, the martyr of Edessa, who was a very early church martyr. He was killed in the year 107. Imagine. The city of Edessa is legendary. Today its name is Urfa. But in those days, there's ancient stories about it of a couple of the 72 disciples of Christ going there to minister and to bring the message of Christ to the king, Abgar. And Christianity started very early there. So early that it's probably the earliest city, no, it is the earliest city that was declared Christian, and it competes with Armenia, but Armenia was the earliest country that became Christian. It's located about 200 miles away from Antioch. This city is relevant to us because they spoke Aramaic, but the dialect of Aramaic that they spoke was called Syriac, which is the dialect that we use in our liturgy and that we spoke for hundreds of years. So there was a bishop already in that early period in Edessa. So this certain Charbel, before he was Christian, he was a pagan high priest. He was the highest pagan religious figure of that city. And he made a great feast for the gods of the city, and thousands of people came to it, and he led the procession. And the Christian bishop of that town was very brave. The story goes that he went to evangelize at that moment to the people, and he came across Charbel. And he got to talking to him. And after hours of talking, who would become Saint Charbel, was so convinced that he renounced paganism and decided to convert to Christianity. The very next day, the bishop baptized him. And this was a great scandal to the pagan peoples. It shook them, because he was the greatest figure in the great city of Edessa, and he became Christian. And it's because of that later on many of them would convert to Christianity, and it spurred on the conversion of the city to Christianity. So the governor ordered him to be captured and ordered him to renounce Christianity and to go back to paganism. Of course, he refused, and he was severely tortured and decapitated. And he had a sister, and as he lay there with his blood, his sister came up and lapped his blood with her dress and put it on her and said, "Let my soul be united with yours." So in other words, she also accepted Christ. And thereupon, she also was slain and also became a martyr. So that church, which was now in ruins because it was destroyed when St. Charbel was there, it was destroyed hundreds of years before by the Ottomans. So that church was dedicated to St. Charbel, the martyr of Edessa, and his sister. So you can imagine that place was spiritually charged. If you've ever been to a shrine and you feel the presence, this is how it must have been to our Saint Charbel, whose name was Yusuf at the time. So he was inspired to also become a monk like his uncles, and at 23 years old, he entered a monastery. And in his first year of novitiate, he was in the monastery of Our Lady of Maifuk in Charbel. So he started to study everything in the region on his own, and he did research on the saints that were in the area. Now, near this monastery where he was novitiate for his first year, there is a town, Ma'ad, I think it said. And in that town was a church dedicated to, guess who? Saint Charbel, the martyr of Edessa. So you can see now there's a sign given to him. And it was amazing to him. And it inspired him to make one decision. By the end of that year, he was given a choice. He can keep his same name, Yusuf, which is a sacred name, Saint Joseph, or he can choose a new name. And so, of course, he chose the name of Charbel after Saint Charbel the martyr. And that tells us something about him. He could have chosen, for example, Saint Maron or Saint Anthony of the desert, the monastic names, great saints, everybody knows them. Instead, he chose a saint that most people largely forgot and a lot of them didn't know about, and was a martyr. So this tells us that he was choosing a life where he wanted to disappear. He wasn't living his own will, but the will of the Lord. And he wanted to live a life of martyrdom, not to live a life where he feels this fulfillment in himself, but rather a fulfillment in the Lord. So this was Saint Charbel. And these are amazing stories that come to us, and they inspire us because we see that through hardships, God brings holiness, and He also brings us signs. So in our life, let us consider the things that we are going through now or have gone through and give thanks to God for them. We give thanks to God for all things, the good things that happen and even the bad things that happen, because in them is the cross, and that cross is our life. So when we say, where is God in this? Well, He is in the pain that you feel inside. That's the cross. He came to share that with us. And so He's very close to us in those moments. He's not far. And so let us then open our hearts and live this mystical life where His holiness comes upon us, and we are no longer living for ourselves, but living by a new name that He alone knows that is ours.